If there hadn't been a Thomas Drake, there couldn't have been an Edward Snowden.
Hello everyone, I'm incredibly excited and honored to be speaking with a true American hero, NSA whistleblower Thomas Drake.
Here we had a guy who did absolutely everything right. He placed his faith in the system. He saw, the warrantless wiretapping of hundreds of millions of Americans. He saw corruption. He brought it to the IG. He brought it to the Congress. And rather than protecting him against retaliation, they actively retaliated against him in the most public and aggressive way.
Framed, labeled an enemy of the state, and threatened with life in prison. That's what happened to Tom when he blew the whistle on the fraud, waste, and abuse of the government's illegal warrantless surveillance program. We all know about Edward Snowden, but according to Edward Snowden himself, if there hadn't been a Thomas Drake, there couldn't have been an Edward Snowden. All right. Tom, thanks so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So I thought you'd be just a great person to comment on the recent confirmation hearing with Tulsi Gabbard for the DNI position, Director of National Intelligence, because, she got grilled a lot for her support of Edward Snowden. So let's just jump in here. Yeah, and I'm still amazed that people don't know your story, because it kind of you hear, oh, Snowden should have gone up the chain of command. Oh, he should have gone through the proper channels. But you showed what happens when you do that. And I'm going to have you chime in a little bit as we get into this clip from the hearing.
First, until you were nominated by the president to be the DNI, you consistently praised the actions of Edward Snowden, some who, I believe, jeopardized the security of our nation, and then, in an effort to flaunt that, fled to Russia.
All right. First, thoughts on that already? Like,
He didn't flee to Russia. That's the first thing.
So what's the real story then?
That was a waypoint. He would never intended on that being the terminal destination. Nor was he planning on seeking asylum. He ended up stuck there because the United States conveniently revoked his passport, so he couldn't go any further.
Yeah, I believe an Obama official, Ben Rhodes, I think, bragged about that in his book, that they revoked his passport and he got stuck in Russia.
Yeah, it's really convenient because it does, in fact, support the narrative that he went to Russia. That was like his whole purpose. No, he knew what the risks were. I mean, it was dangerous enough just leaving Hong Kong, going through Russia, and not flying over airspace where he could be forced down or have the flight path altered. He was actually headed to South America.
Yeah.
They know there was actually seats reserved on plane was flying out to the Americas. Not United States of America.
And didn't the U.S. did they down a plane like that they thought Snowden was on going to Ecuador?
That was Morales. Yeah, his actual, remember, forget diplomatic immunity. They completely violated the Vienna Convention. They literally forced him. They precluded him from landing rights. He was forced to land in Austria, and they boarded the plane. This was kind of like a weird version of Han Solo, the Millennium Falcon. So the Empire boards the plane, right? Very convenient, because they actually thought that he was escaping under diplomatic cover as a quote unquote international fugitive wanted by the United States. That was completely untrue. That's how hyper paranoid they were, and how far they were willing to go, including violating actual international law and customs.
No, I mean, I'm trying to understand, explain to me. So he was planning to go to Latin America.
Yes.
Now, but
yes.
not on this flight?
No, there was a
Oh,
not on
that's
that
right, that's
flight.
right, that's right.
No,
That was
not in the diplomatic flight.
that was
That's
the
been
prime minister or
that,
something.
but
Yeah.
that was a narrative that the government is like, oh no, this was like it was all arranged. Morales would fly into Moscow, and then they would just secret speared him out, as it were. That's not true at all. He actually had commercial. He did.
Yeah. Yeah.
I believe it was via Cuba. It's I don't have all the details in terms of but there was a picture at one point taken of the two seats because there was someone, people that came out there, oh, we're going to be there with him as he leaves. But that's why he ended up, in the transit zone for all those many weeks. He was stuck.
Yeah.
Putin didn't want him either because he didn't want him. Why would he want a whistleblower?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could say he wanted dropped my stylus, everyone. So you could say he the reason he's letting him live basically is because, he hates the US and the US government, the empire, he's an enemy of the US empire. But yeah, I mean, Oliver Stone's gone to Russia, and yeah, Putin, he is not a fan of whistleblowers. I mean, if you
Not at all.
think about Russia.
Yeah. But remember also, Russia is one of the few countries that does not. This is the other part of all this. How do you? Huge risk even going through Russia, right? Huge risk. There was the risk of, like, as we realized later, what happened in Morales' plane. Russia is one of the few countries that does not have an extradition treaty with the United States.
Yeah.
They trade, as we know, right?
Yeah.
Exchanges do take place.
And that.
So where do you go? They're already here with all this aside, right? All of it. A lot of the smoke and mirrors, right? So you had the smog, right? Of just secrecy and national security and politics and just world affairs between quote unquote superpowers. He is safer still, in Russia than just about anywhere else. And remember, there were attempts, multiple attempts, even while he was in the transit zone, to find a way to get to a different country. The problem was with the revoked passport. How do you then make your way when you no longer have proper papers? And there was a number of countries that were willing to actually accept him, but it got all obviously hung up in the travel area, right? With not having an active passport. So extremely convenient for the US.
Yeah. I mean, and it just explains, like, if people are like, oh, why would he go to Russia if he wasn't in bed with Russia? Well, like you said, it's the only safe place he can go before, escaping to where he really wanted to go, which was Latin America.
But it was but it was a temporary transit. He was actually only going to be there for a very short time, remain in the transit zone. It's like you do in any international airport. You got transit zones which allow you to, without even stepping off into quote unquote the sovereign, territory of that nation, you remain in the airport, and then you just go on to your next flight.
All right, I'm getting some notes that my audio isn't loud enough. Come on, guys, comment. Is it better now? I turned it up a bit. Hopefully that's better. Thomas, is it coming in for you? Okay.
Yeah, it's a bit louder. Yes.
Okay.
That's okay.
If it's too loud.
No, it's not too loud because I can adjust it on my end.
Okay.
Yeah.
How's that, everybody? Remember to okay. All right.
It's just a lot of fog. You got it. The historical is like you can genuflect automatically. Some genuflect automatically when, oh, Russia bad, Snowden bad. Oh, Snowden's in Russia. He's even badder. That's just kind of a simplistic way to look at it. What's he supposed to do? He's stuck. He's stuck. Multiple attempts to seek asylum, or at least temporary, in another country, and it just didn't work out, right? So he got temporary residency, and then he ended up getting permanent, right? They accepted the asylum. Remember, that's also supposed to be internationally recognized, right? Sure, it wasn't when Assange got unsummarily yanked out of the Ecuadorian embassy some years later. But so yeah, he's stuck there. But what do you do? Then you got to create a life. He knew. Let's just say it this way. He saw what happened to me and a number of others. He knew, given the nature and the scope and scale of what he was bringing out, and to journalists. Remember, he never released anything to anybody else except to selected journalists. He knew that by doing that he was putting his life on the line, or at a minimum, he would end up in a maximum security prison for many, many years, if not the rest of his life.
Yeah, and what's funny to me is you still have that smear that he, he's this Putin buddy or whatever, and ignoring that he planned to go to Latin America, and the fact that they downed the Ecuadorian president's plane because they thought he was on it proves that they know damn well he had no intention to stay in Russia. He wanted to be in Latin America.
Yeah, that's another iron twist on this.
Yeah.
Why, if that's the case and he was just going to stay in Russia, then why did they force Morales' plane down, believing that he was harboring a fugitive, quote unquote, a fugitive?
All
well,
right.
technically, he is a fugitive in the eyes of the U.S. I'll say injustice system, because they in essence had issued charges against him.
All right, let's get back to the hearing. There's a lot to correct here.
You even called Edward Snowden, and I quote here, a brave whistleblower. Every member of this committee supports the rights of legal whistleblowers.
All right, Tom.
Yeah, I could go on for quite a while. Legal whistleblowers. Yeah, that's another interesting thing. So it's like, I guess they get to define what a whistleblower is. And if they don't, if it's illegal disclosure / unauthorized leaking, then they're not legal. That means they're not a whistleblower. I ran into that myself.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, you were a legal whistleblower. Then they framed you.
Remember, I went through every channel that existed, literally multiple times. Okay, over multiple years. I was with Congress, DOD, before that, the Inspector General, the Office of General Counsel, my own bosses, including the final whistleblowing NSA that I actually did was with then General Keith Alexander. Didn't go over very well.
Yeah.
That was in November 2005. I did make a fateful decision. And I knew it was fraught with extraordinary peril. I knew that. I was no naivete at all. When I went to touch the third rail, go to the press. But here's the kicker. Going to the press is not criminal. Going to the press does not violate national security. It was assumed I did, right? Actually, NSA, unauthorized contact with the press is, at that time, was an administrative violation. That's all. But I understood. I knew the government goes, oh no, you leaked classified.
But you only went to the press when you already tried the proper channels in congressional oversight, right? Well, let's rewind a little bit for people who aren't familiar with your story.
Okay.
You are a top senior advisor. What was at the
whole time
administrator
I was there,
at the NSA, the National Security Agency.
Yes.
This is the agency
yes.
that Snowden leaked documents showing was spying, doing warrantless spying on everybody, all Americans. So go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I was at the epigenesis of that program right after 9/11. First day on the job was 9/11. It's a whole story in itself. It's still to this day, 25 years later, anniversary next year, is fresh now as it was then. It's just like it's that moment where life completely altered. There's my life before 9/11, but there's my life after 9/11. It's never been the same since. So, there I was. I've been hired in from the outside, interestingly enough. I wasn't brought up from within, although I've been a contractor there for a number of years. I reported to the number 3, the director of signals intelligence, the operational mission of NSA. In fact, the entire time I was there, my boss supervisor always reported to the top deck, the civilian head, which is the deputy director. That's how senior I was. So I got to know a lot of people, a lot of fellow seniors, a whole lot, and I had enterprise accountability, including overseas. So in multiple positions. But I found out to my horror, right after 9/11, the failure to keep people out of harm's way resulted in the NSA being designated the executive agent on the President Bush's President Surveillance Program, the PSP, a super secret mass surveillance regime that extended to the domestic borders and to any U.S. person, stateside or overseas. Now, it is true in the history of NSA, it had carte blanche when it came to foreign intelligence. And up until the scandals and all the revelations in the 70s, and then there was the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which was still you had to meet the Fourth Amendment, although you could do hot pursuit. Remember, foreign intelligence, right? So it was really carte blanche when it came to anything else. All that was completely bypassed after 9/11. I was even part of the chain where we would put information together. It would be put in front through the FBI. They were the ones that would provide the affidavit to the secret FISA court. That was all blown out, just blown away. Well, no, we just need the data. I mean, and then I would say, well, wait a minute. If FISA is not working, if it's no longer meeting the demands of the post 9/11 era, the digital age in particular, then you go back to Congress, because it's Congress, and I'm going to emphasize Congress, right? They're the ones that have the ability to change the law. Now, it's still the president who could either veto or sign into law, but it's Congress that actually legislates law through bills. And they said, no, if we go to Congress with what we want to do, they'll say no. You can imagine at that moment, and this is early October, when I confronted the general counsel, who was read in. It was we're talking its own compartment. It literally had its own compartment, which at the time was a highly classified program name, which was unusual that the program name itself was the compartment inside another compartment, which is beyond sensitive compartment information, exceptionally controlled, what's called ECI, not to get too much in the weeds here.
Well, just the core issue is, you have Mark Warner grilling Tulsi Gabbard for not condemning Snowden because he didn't go through the proper channels, that he didn't go through the legal options.
I went to those channels. They were exposure channels. The fact that I would, quote unquote, use the existing internal channels, including at the time they changed it later under the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act, I could go directly to Congress, which I did several times. Then I was part of official. There was off the record, but then I was essentially subpoenaed with two different investigations: Saxby-Chambliss subcommittee. It was a fairly new committee in Homeland Security, and then the bigger joint 9/11 inquiry, the 9/11 joint inquiry.
So
I provided material evidence, reams and reams of data, and verbal. I mean, we're talking on the record, right?
Yeah.
But it all blew back on me. I was fingered, I was tagged, I was targeted even internally before it ever went to the press that I was a dangerous individual inside NSA. I was effectively the digital version, right, of a Benedict Arnold.
For going through the proper channels. This is the result.
But remember, you got to remember though, this was in essence indicting. I say indicting in terms of whistleblowing the highest levels of the government, up to including the president. So you can imagine they're not going to take this lightly. They were using the cover and color of national security, the imprimatur of national security, to bypass existing law and statutes. And remember, there was criminal liability, criminal sanctions for violating FISA at that time. Oh, I guess we're not violating, we're bypassing it. Of course, later, they started passing ex post facto laws to legalize what was patently unlawful and unconstitutional, which in itself is unconstitutional.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. It's still surreal to me. It really is. But yeah, so you can imagine, remember, Snowden comes along years later and he's seeing all this, right? All of this. It's like, why would I want to? If I'm going to, quote unquote, blow the lid off of the much fuller metastasization of what I had blown the whistle on early on, right after 9/11, I'm going to have to go directly to the journalists. I can't go through the channels because he saw what happened to me and the other whistleblowers.
Which ended up putting your life at risk to life in prison.
At one point, I remember it was a third cooperative, I'll say interrogation. It was technically an interview. It was a setup. I actually was confronted by the chief prosecutor of the case at that time. This goes back to April of 2000. We're going all the way back to 2008 before I broke off cooperation and ended up resigning because I realized what I was facing. They were going to permanently revoke my clearance. They'd already suspended it and I was on administrative leave. He said, you better start talking. We have more than enough evidence to put you away for a long, long time. How would you spend the rest of your life in prison, Mr. Drake? Start talking. They wanted me to enter into a plea agreement. And I literally said, which made the news later when all of this came out, that I was never going to plea bargain with the truth. I was facing when they finally indicted me 2 years later, right?
Yeah.
I was facing 35 years in prison. It was a 10-count indictment, 5 under the Espionage Act, 1 for obstruction of justice, 4 for quote unquote lying to FBI agents when I was actually telling the truth. Everything was flipped upside down. And all the documents that they alleged caused exceptionally grave damage, not just damage or grave, exceptionally grave. The highest level were all unclassified, all came out in the court hearings, the pretrial proceedings later, sorry.
That's an incredible detail.
Yeah, well, there's a lot more behind all that because of just, I mean, I was literally staring, well, I had all kinds of 8 balls in front of me. I'm staring deep into Pandora's box. And it's just dark looking back at me. I mean, what can I say? I mean, yeah, the distance of time has helped, but I was in a very bad place in terms of what was possible, right? And they really wanted to, they thought that I was the primary leaker, as they called it, to the New York Times, because they kept this program. They called it the program. It was known as Stellar Wind was the original name. They kept this program secret for over 4 years until an extraordinary article came out from Eric Lichtau and James Rice in New York Times Above the Fold, the old print newspaper Above the Fold, revealing for the first time, and this time it's just the tip of the iceberg, a warrantless wiretapping program. And it caused a huge stir. This is December 2005. I knew when that came out that I was going to be a target because so few people, and I hadn't gotten to the press yet. They tried to frame, there's this huge frame job on the part of the government where I actually had contact with a reporter at the New York Times earlier because it wouldn't fit their chronology. I can smile and laugh now, but it didn't at the time. I had not contacted the press. I hadn't gotten to anybody in the press. I knew what the risks were. I really did know. But I knew when that article came out that I'd be one of the very, very few that would be targeted because very few people knew about the program. It was that close hold.
So not only did they frame you or try to frame you as this leaker to the New York Times, they framed you for having, okay, so you did later share information with the Baltimore Sun, but it was unclassified information. And
That's correct.
They retroactively classified it to frame you as having broken the law and leaked classified information.
Yes, and it's even worse. The new chief prosecutor, William Welsh, who interesting enough had been, well, he used to head up the Office of Public Integrity, and there was a huge scandal involving well, I wouldn't even go into all the details right now, right? But he ended up having to leave, and this was his way back, right? So they gave him the Espionage Act case against me to hammer me hard. They manipulated, I'm not kidding you, doctored evidence to make it to take what was patently unclassified and make it look like it was classified. And then when that all fell apart later in the pretrial proceedings, they argue, well, it's unclassified, but it's sensitive national defense information, demands the same protection. When that failed, because there's a lot of public information, right? When that failed, he said, well, they started arguing this obscure 1959 National Security Agency Act, which was an administrative act, right? And they claimed that that exempted NSA from the normal rules. Anything involving NSA was supposed to receive or could receive the same protection as if it were classified. When that didn't work, they said he should have known it was classified. So, you know, that's besides them going back and, doing the whole classification, retroactive as they call it, which is a weird word, this retroactive classification. Well, it wasn't classified, but then became classified. And the irony is, even in their own classification system, they had, in fact, officially, on the ones they said were classified, there was records that they were unclassified when they were actually looked at, right? There was this whole thing about everything by default is classified until it's officially looked at, right, by a classification officer. There's actually only certain people, there's a small handful of people that have the official, but internally, you didn't really worry about that. It's only when it went outside of NSA or a publication, which I went through myself, and I wrote this article for IEEE Computer 96. I went through that review process, the pre-pub review process. So yeah, they just want to make an example of me. As I found out later, Cheney had issued a fine and fry whoever it was that leaked to the New York Times and just burn them. I'm the one they ultimately put the huge bullseye on and said, we are going after him. I was senior enough, but I wasn't connected. No political scion. I wasn't part of some Camelot family. I didn't, I wasn't, I was, my father had been a World War II veteran, Strategic Air Command, military brat. I was just middle-class America, right? Serving his country, but I was senior enough. So it's convenient to hammer on me because the risks were or at least the government, the risks were very low.
Go on. No.
Well, I want to get back to, because I find you're back to the hearing, right?
Sure.
Tulsi Gabbard refused to call Snowden a traitor. Now, this is an interesting thing because I was labeled enemy of the state. I was called worse than a spy by the chief prosecutor before the judge because what I had done was worse than a spy, because spies give up secrets in secret. I was giving up secrets to the public, which means everybody got to see it. Oh, wow. So it was a crime. See, that becomes a crime against the state for having dared expose the government wrongdoing and violations of law. Well,
yeah. Yep.
Okay.
For exposing crimes, they try to frame you with a crime.
It's not as simple as much as certain senators want to simply make it black and white and make that their, but remember, performative test. Traitor. If not a traitor, then I got serious concerns about whether or not you should be the DNI. So I understand. I'll say sympathetic with Tulsi refusing to call Snowden a traitor, and here's why, because I think it's really critical for your viewing audience. Her stance actually reflects a more nuanced understanding of what is arguably, and I'll accept myself, a very complex role that Snowden played in exposing unconstitutional government actions while simultaneously breaking the law. Is there laws, especially executive orders in particular, which gets into like the nuance, when you take, which is clearly classified, different from my case, but clearly classified, and have it published through, in this case, journalists. Yeah, you can make that argument. And I think, and I'm just going to say, I believe that her position was an attempt to balance her acknowledgement of the legal violations, which I think is more accurate than breaking the law, with the undeniable public value of the information that he revealed. But see, being nuanced in this space is like, can't be nuanced. So it also reflects, to her credit, a refusal to label Snowden a traitor because it stems from a recognition that there's a much bigger picture here. Oh, I guess they don't have time for the bigger picture. She's consistently acknowledged, as I said, that he broke the law in terms of how information is handled. So yes, he leaks classified, I'll say leaks, but she emphasized that the disclosures, and this is where it gets complex, because it did expose, there's no question about that, egregious, illegal, and unconstitutional surveillance programs, the full metastasization, at least as of 2013, that I had blown the whistle on. But remember, I was treated in a very similar fashion. So these revelations did lead to reforms. It's important to note that. And even, the government wanted unconstrained 702. Let's go, Section 702 of the FISA. That did lead to some constraints, including, people forget this, the passage of the USA Freedom Act in 2015. That curtailed certain mass data collection practices where essentially had been unrestricted. I'll just say unrestricted up to that point. So to call Snowden a traitor, or attempting to get her to say he's a traitor just to salve the political performative issues of certain senators, that ignores the broader context. And then guess what it does? This is what I find, again, stepping back just a little bit, it reduces his actions to a simplistic narrative that doesn't capture their complexity. So her approach reflects, this is interesting. And I mean, again, she's speaking to where I've been in part. Her approach reflects an understanding of whistleblowing as a moral and ethical act when legal channels, disclosure channels like I followed fail. So she pointed out that there were established procedures, but she acknowledged quite implicitly, that's clear from her testimony, that those disclosure channels and the processes behind them often fail. I'll say pretty much fail most of the time to protect individuals. There is remedies, but it's not really enforceable. So it aligns with my own experience as a whistleblower, where the internal channels proved completely ineffective, and in fact, in the use of those, it triggered all kinds of retaliatory measures that were quite severe, and I'll even say swift. So her reluctance stems from all those, I'll say, loaded implications. Maybe that's another way to say it. Because, see, this is what's critical for your viewing audience, to call someone a traitor. See, by definition, if you actually look it up, he didn't commit treason, right? Treason. Some attempted to do that, but he didn't. They didn't even charge him with that. That's another part of the Espionage Act. He wasn't charged with that. But Snowden's actions were really motivated, as were mine, to inform the public. So about government overreach and violating the law. And so as someone who has faced accusations of betrayal for standing up for what? What are we standing up for? It's constitutional principles, the Fourth Amendment. I understand, though, how this label can be easily used, a label traitor, to weaponize and discredit legitimate dissent. Remember, she also wants to move forward. I mean, I'm giving her credit here in the hearing. They just didn't want to hear it. In fact, if you remember, I listened to it very carefully. She was interrupted a number of times. They would not let her. At one point, she's talking over. She can be very strong. She can stand her ground, but they wouldn't let her emphasize that. We need to prevent future. I agree. There's no question about that. I get there was all kinds of stuff put into place after the Snowden disclosures, right? Insider threat programs that were extraordinarily extensive. So, but see, what's the nuance? The nuance, this is a both and. Okay, it's not either or, it's a both and. She wants to reform whistleblower protections, and she wants to ensure that the legal avenues are there and protected when you are reporting misconduct. That's what they're there for. That's a forward-leaning or looking approach. And it signals her intent, to her credit, to address systemic issues instead of just gratuitously dwelling on past controversies. The government doesn't get to decide who the whistleblower is. They tried to do that in my case. They didn't even want testimony to demonstrate beyond any reasonable doubt. But they didn't want any of that entered into the record as evidence or First Amendment or anything dealing with classification. Gee, I wonder why.
Yeah.
So it demonstrates her integrity. It demonstrates her commitment to nuance, an environment that I will argue too often, but this is intelligence. Intelligence is an art and science. It's not perfect. It doesn't say, yeah, it's this and that, just absolutely. There are no, rarely do you get absolutes, right? In the intelligence space that often, but this environment, as you saw in the committee hearings, often demands black and white answers. And that's what they were like. I just wanted that answer. And because, so it's not an easy stance to take, especially with the extraordinary political pressure. And there is no question in my mind that behind the scenes, they're doing everything they can to disrail certain individuals, certain agencies do not want her as the DNI.
Yeah.
So she's willing, I mean, just to elaborate just a bit
Sure.
more, her willingness to prioritize principles over expediency. That's the kind of leadership I'm going to, I can, you could argue other things about Tulsi, right? I get it. I've heard them. I've seen them. But that's the kind of leadership you actually need in intelligence oversight. Someone who understands national security, which she actually talked about in some detail with quite, I would say, very clear language. And at the same time, the necessity of safeguarding constitutional freedoms. I mean, otherwise, who are we? I mean, God.
So you talk about like how Mark Warner and the rest of the committee, they wanted no nuance.
Nope, no nuance at all.
And my God, like they cut her off so many times. Just Mark Warner alone here, I counted at least like 3 or 4 times. Let's see.
Whistleblower.
See, but remember, go ahead, sorry.
Snowden, I quote here, a brave whistleblower. Every member of this committee supports the rights of legal whistleblowers.
All right, if you just rewind, you see how much bullshit, how that was total bullshit.
Well, I got something to say about that.
Go ahead.
I do. I know how quickly the government moves to vilify whistleblowers, period. When I exposed, and they were unconstitutional, those secret surveillance programs, and today, besides 9/11 intelligence failures, besides massive fraud, waste, and abuse, guess what I was accused of endangering? National security. Even though my actions were aimed at protecting the Constitution, as if the Constitution means anything anymore. As I was told back in October, just, Tom, you don't understand. It's quaint, can't keep up with the times. Historical document, get on with it. Really? Jeez. That same playbook was used against Snowden. By refusing to call him a traitor, she was signaling she was not willing to perpetuate the narrative without considering the full scope of what his actual disclosures achieved. Even Obama admitted, as reluctantly as he wanted to, he admitted in public that it caused all kinds of conversations and meetings, and maybe we did overreach. Maybe we need to pull back a little because we are America, right? We're supposed to be different, right? It did force, this is the kick. See, this is the whistleblowers, the canary in the coal mine. It did, there's no question. Mine was more stateside. There was some international press, but it really went full blown with Snowden. That's why there was a period there where everybody and their brother wanted to interview me because so few people knew about all this in the background. And then people are saying, "Oh, wait a minute! Didn't you blow the whistle some years ago?" And Mark Klein and a number of others, yes, but we didn't do what Snowden did, which was bringing out highly classified information. That was a difference, and a lot of people are biased if it's not on paper, if it's not in a document. then it didn't happen. So don't have proof. And they'll go with the government narrative. It's much harder to do that, as Snowden well knew, given the history here. So just to, it sparked public debates, it sparked, legal challenges, even international reforms. But to miss all of that out of hand and brand him a traitor would have been intellectually dishonest, I believe, on her part. Now, her stance suggests she does see Snowden not as betraying, even though that's what I endured. Oh, you betrayed your country. You took an oath. Wait. Non-disclosure agreement is not an oath. Snowden took non-disclosure agreements. They're not oaths. The non-disclosure agreement in itself, based on the executive order that governs it, does not allow the use of a non-disclosure agreement to be used as cover for breaking the law or for covering embarrassment or administrative failure. It doesn't allow for that. It's actually clear in the executive order.
Yeah, so you violate a non-disclosure, but you're upholding the oath you took to defend the Constitution, and yet they flip it as if you're violating the Constitution. You're doing the exact opposite, or that you're breaking the law. You're doing the exact opposite.
Maybe, and I've said this publicly, I'll say a little bit differently. There might be a relationship between how far the government is willing to go after you and the degree to which the disclosure touches a huge nerve or several.
Yeah.
So
I'm amazed.
Remember, breaking the law doesn't equate to betraying your country.
I am amazed that they're still so touchy about it.
Hyper, because it's the one place you've got bipartisanship.
Yeah, wild. Yeah. At the beginning of the hearing,
yes.
Tom Cotton gave Mark Warner some of his minutes. That's never happened before. Even Mark Warner acknowledged that. That is so disturbing and kind of depressing. That is the one thing that there's bipartisanship over, and that is that you need to come down hard on and smear the hell out of and villainize truth tellers, whistleblowers who are exposing government corruption and government abuse.
Well, there's another distinction. Focus on the messenger, caricaturize them, defame them, character assassination, go after them, spread rumors, innuendo, and that way you get to cover and provide a smoke screen for the actual message, the disclosure itself. That's the thing you don't want anybody to really notice. So part of the distinction here is that many in positions of power, as you saw in the committee, fail, or I will say refuse to make that concession. I'll use that word loosely, because guess what? It challenges their authority or exposes systemic failures or violations that they themselves are responsible for, especially in that committee in terms of oversight.
Yeah. But
which I call undersight now.
Another wild thing though is isn't there a history of the intelligence communities abusing their spying powers, to spy on the oversight?
Yes.
Committee to congressional. I mean, that's
the whole torture program.
Yeah. That's incredible.
We still don't know. We have an executive summary. We don't have the full report. It was buried. And CIA under Brennan was actually literally spying on Congress.
On these guys, on the Mark Warners.
They just didn't do it.
And the Tom Cottons. Yeah.
Right. Yep.
But they just go, but they must be terrified. They must have some serious dirt on them or something. What could it, why is it?
They're co-opted because you have to remember that's a set of committee members from both parties are privy to a lot of secrets.
Mm-hmm.
That thing with secrets. Oh, I get to know things. I'm inside this special sacred world with priests and priestesses, and there's this altar, and you bow down before it. And it's called national security. And we wear these special robes, right? And there's a special key, and there's all this there are secrets worth keeping. Ellsberg himself has said that. There are, but there aren't too many of them.
And then I guess, you know what? They don't even need to have dirt. The intelligence community doesn't even need to have dirt. They're just, the reason the Mark Warners and the Tom Cottons, maybe not them, specifically, but generally speaking, it's because, they know damn well that the same smears that they're issuing right now that were leveled against Snowden, you, and anybody who tries to expose the apparatus, the spy machine, that those are going to be directed at them, because there's no real basis for all. It's basically just lies and distorted truths, and it's just going to be it's just so easily leveled against anybody, and it's going to be directed right at them if they, basically have the same or express the same moral compass that Tulsi has in her career.
Well, here is something. So this is a perfect segue for me to then comment on this, because this is often not mentioned, discussed. This where the convenience of black and white labels can have on future whistleblowers, not just existing ones or going back in the past, right? And it's traitor. It's so easy to simply say any individual who exposes government wrongdoing, think about this, and then just say they're a traitor. Why? Because it sends a clear message that dissent will not be tolerated, no matter how justified or necessary it is. And guess what it creates? A culture of fear, a culture of silence, be seen, not heard within government institutions that are supposed to be providing for the common defense, to include national security. It's precisely the opposite of what democracy demands and requires of us. So in refusing to call Snowden a traitor, she's positioning herself, and you're not going to hear this. I've nothing anywhere close to this, because they've labeled her as well. Okay.
Yeah.
But in refusing to call him a traitor, she positioned herself as someone willing to wrestle with difficult questions rather than simply defaulting to easy answers. She's acknowledging the tension that clearly exists between national security and individual rights. We know tension existed since the foundation of the country, between legal obligations and moral imperatives. And it's that kind of thinking. You can call it nuance, but it's that kind of thinking that is so rare in politics, especially when it comes to issues as polarizing as whistleblowing and surveillance. I mean, think about it. So her stance, I have to say, resonated deeply with me, because it reflects an understanding of what whistleblowers like me, and in this case, Snowden, have faced. We didn't act out of malice. We did not act out of disloyalty. We didn't act out because we were willful betrayers. We acted out of a profound commitment to the principles the country was founded on. So in refusing to condemn Snowden, just to reemphasize this, Tulsi Gabbard demonstrates respect, can we hear that, for those principles and the incredibly difficult choices, even life-altering choices, that whistleblowers like myself and Snowden are often forced to make. And in the end, by the way, her position is not about Snowden. It's not just about Snowden. You know what it's about? See, people go, you really? See, this is where, like, wait a minute, aren't we supposed to be America? For all the faults and foibles, isn't there supposed to be something about America that makes us exceptional? I don't think we are, right? But, that gets used sort of in the imperialistic approaches, manifest destiny, and all this other stuff. It's the kind of country we want to be. Do we want to be a nation that values accountability? Do we want to be a nation that holds power? Remember, with great power, remember the Spider-Man movie, with great power comes great. Well, it can also exercise great irresponsibility. That's the other side of the same coin. We want to silence people like Snowden who dare speak out against abuses of power. I think she believes in the former. And in that, I commend her. I have to say it. I commend her.
And so, I hope they confirm her. Now, everybody just watch. You could just see what Tom was just talking about. Just watch any effort of Tulsi to offer nuance. Watch how quickly Mark Warner tries to shut it down.
But Edward Snowden isn't a whistleblower. And in this case, I'm a lot closer to the chairman's words, where he said Snowden is, quote, an egotistical, serial liar and traitor who, quote, deserves to rot in jail for the rest of his life. Ms. Gabbard, a simple yes or no question. Do you still think Edward Snowden is brave?
Mr. Vice Chairman, Edward Snowden broke the law. I do not agree with or support with all of the information and intelligence that he released, nor the way in which he did it. There would have been opportunities for him to come to you on this committee or seek out the IG to release that information. The fact is, he also...
Sorry, I have to pause it. That's not necessarily true, right? Although although the way she frames it is like there would have been, right? She didn't say there was, so I don't know, but
that's her being nuanced herself.
Yeah.
But I will be the first to tell you, and I realize I'm a bit cynical given my experience. I provided prima facie evidence. This was not second, third hand. Remember, you can blow the whistle because you have a reasonable belief that something is not right. I actually knew it. I provided that to key people with access on the committee, staffers, etc., and plus the formal investigations, prima facie, all buried. I remember the people. Well, where is it all? All they have is a record that I was interviewed from the 9/11 joint inquiry. Where's the data? Where's all the material? The material evidence? Oh, you have to talk to the Senate archivist. They go to the Senate archivist. Oh, that's at the NARA.
wow.
Really? No one can find it. I also know this. This is interesting. Apparently, because this came through the co-chair, that what I provided the joint inquiry was so sensitive that it couldn't even be in the classified report. What does that tell you? Because the government was violating the Fourth Amendment willfully as a executive act of commission without any restrictions.
You know, and this I have to say, like, it's just wild to me that with all the talking about how Trump is Hitler and fascism and, you know, but and yet at the same time, the Democrats, as they say this, they are deifying George Bush, like,
yes,
which is the administration that did all this horrible stuff, that took away our Fourth Amendment protection, essentially.
Yeah, and then Obama said we're going to look forward, not backwards. People actually thought he was going to like reset because the pendulum had swung so far over. Yeah, no, he just legalized it all under his administration and then extended it. Like 702 became the legal back door with Executive 12333 going all the way back to the Reagan administration to be able to acquire U.S. person data. Well, wait, if we haven't actually looked at it, it's technically not a violation. Yeah, but wait, you're doing this without their consent. And what's the suspicion? Right? Remember, there's this reasonable suspicion. What's reasonable suspicion? Kind of go back to the Patriot Act. Remember, the language then gets secretly interpreted. They did it with the Patriot Act. If you're a subscriber, you are a customer, you are a consumer, and the business, quote unquote, holds that data, you don't have it. It's not yours. It's the business. Oh, then we can just show up at the business and say, here, turn it over. Not, with a national security letter, which is a blanket warrant, which you can't have blanket general warrants. That's a violation of the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment. One of the main reasons I remember that we had a revolution in this country, the first one. Second one was the Civil War, but the first one, fundamental basis of the revolution that created the United States of America, I could argue very easily. That's why the Bill of Rights were added, not in the first Constitution, right? It had to go back a couple of years to get the 10 amendments put in. First and Fourth Amendment, a couple others, but the first and fourth. Without those, we're not America.
Also, even as he broke the law, released information that exposed egregious, illegal, and unconstitutional programs that are happening within our government that led to serious reform.
No nuances allowed. No nuances allowed.
That Congress undertook.
Chairman, we got 5 minutes. So I take your answer, and these are your quotes. Brave, please join my bipartisan legislation calling for charges to be dropped against him. Do you disagree that legislation was not appropriate? Do you believe he is brave or not?
Yeah, one,
back those words?
once again, Senator, Edward Snowden broke the law. He
Ms. Gabbard,
also
I'm not
released
talking-
information
we agree that
Not doesn't let her get a word in.
Edward Snowden
that
broke the
exposed
law.
the United
I'm
States
asking you a
government's
question whether
illegal
your
programs.
legislation and your words
Wow.
are
Amazing, and it keeps going. It
still
keeps
your
going.
beliefs.
Here's
Yes or
a-
no,
here's a-
please.
Uh-huh.
Hold up a mirror and go right back at him. This is the mirror for me. Then what does it say? Because this is the huge denial. This is the elephant in the room when it comes to all of this. What happens if it's power itself, the highest level of power in the US government is breaking the law? Just doesn't matter.
And these are the
But
same
how
people.
dare you call them out? How dare you call them out? Because then that's a crime. That's a crime that you are committing against the state because you're calling out state crimes.
Yeah.
See, it sets up, to me, it sets up a toxic, it really does. This begins to infect the body politic. And when this goes on for long enough, guess what? We have two governments. That's part of, you say deep state is way overused. I don't like using it anymore. But the secret side of government has been increasingly used as a cover, as a foil, for lots of executive action and other activities that are without, in some cases, years and years or decades, without the public ever knowing or only getting hints at it. Just better to operate in secret because you don't have to be held to account. If anything, if you're in secret, you have a higher level of obligation, a higher obligation in terms of the oath you took to support and defend the Constitution, to faithfully execute the law of the land, than if you're not secret. Because you're in secret, no one can really see you, right? It's secret. So you have a higher obligation.
Let's see if Mark Warner lets Tulsi Gabbard mention that that Snowden exposed illegal government activity. Let's see if she lets if he lets her say that one time without being interrupted.
Okay.
I'm making myself very clear. Edward Snowden broke the law. He released information about the United States government's illegal activities. If I may just finish my thoughts, Senator. In this role that I've been nominated for, if confirmed as Director of National Intelligence, I will be responsible for protecting our nation's secrets. And I have 4 immediate steps that I would take to prevent another Snowden-like leak.
Ma'am, I would simply ask you again.
So I'm curious, what would prevent another Snowden-like leak? I mean, I guess there's a couple of ways. Obviously, they could have just
a simple answer. You want a simple answer from me?
Sure.
Don't break the law.
Yeah.
Don't break the law and then use national security to cover it up. It's always the cover up is always worse than the crime, quote unquote. Crime can be pretty bad. But remember, the cover up in essence saying we don't want to be held to account and we have the power. This is the catch-22, the Joseph Heller novel, right? We have the power. What are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? We have it, you don't. Wow. Okay, so they're the keepers of the secrecy realm.
So Tulsi's got a 4-point plan to prevent new Snowden leakers. Tom's got just a 1-step plan.
Right.
Don't break the law. Don't violate the Constitution.
Right, simple.
Although I think
don't have to worry about covering up. Think of Nixon. I grew up in the 70s as a young teenager. It was on full display. And they had to record. Remember, someone say if he didn't have the recordings in the White House, then he may have been able to keep his presidency, second term. But there was recordings of him talking. Let's different era, though.
Yeah. Oh well, but I don't know. Yeah. It seems like history's repeating.
Different era in terms of accountability.
Oh, because
he resigned. There's no question he would have been impeached and found guilty.
Yeah, Bush is just a fucking saint. He's just considered a saint.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
It's just weird. In some ways, Democrats are like the Republicans of old, and the Republicans, I was like, where are they gone? I mean, they're just now, it's like, wow. Name only. They are the rhinos. I was a lifelong Republican until more recently. I've always been independent, but because, for a primary you had to choose, I was a Republican for many, many years, but I always voted as an independent. The Republicans, again, be careful with labels here. I don't want to stereotype, but a lot of people, they're calling themselves Republicans are really, they're not. They're betraying the fundamental ideals and principles upon which America was created. And just because democracy has its problems, just because democracy is considered a weaker form of governance, does not mean, oh, it's not working, get rid of it. I get how messy democracy is, but it requires an informed citizenry. See the problem here? If I don't have an informed citizenry, it's a lot easier for the stuff we're seeing to unfold. And yeah, you're going to have people like me and others who are going to say, I just can't live with myself. If I'm seeing the government, as I did shortly after 9/11, violating the Constitution, and I remain silent, I would be complicit in the crime that they were committing. So there I was. I'm going to defend the Constitution against my own government. You know how surreal that is? How does that make you feel as an American who took the oath 5 times in his military, government, civilian career? Not very good.
Yeah, it's amazing. Let's see if I don't remember if does he stop her again? Does she get to say it once without being interrupted? I don't know. Let's see.
I don't think you're going to answer. I agree with Tom Cotton. He's a traitor. You, for years, until you got chosen by President Trump, have celebrated this guy as brave. You've called for him to be pardoned, for his charges to be dropped.
All right, I just want to say, Tom, so yeah, you're right. The Republicans and, Cotton and Warner, this is one of the few issues that they have bipartisan agreement on.
Yes.
That, whistleblowers need to be villainized and are traitors. But just the fact that Tulsi was nominated and very possibly will be confirmed, I think that makes me feel good have hope for the Republican Party. I mean, I don't know. I've been following politics enough to actually really try to retain any hope, because it's kind of ridiculous because I've been disappointed so many times. But the Republicans there's a part of the Republican Party that is way more, I don't know, that seems to care more about fundamental rights than the Democrats now, right? It's kind of it's the reverse from the Bush era.
I agree.
Yeah.
No, there are obviously exceptions. There's always exceptions. I can point to any number of the senators. There are exceptions. In fact, in some ways, I abhor the labels of even parties. I think in some ways, to me, it in itself is just this huge filter. What are the issues at hand? What do we need to resolve? Let's do it together. Forget all the labels. Oh, because you say one position, I got to automatically take up the other. When in fact, the two of them are actually way more aligned than they're different.
Yeah.
There's a lot of performative politics going on. Lots.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine a director of national intelligence that would say that kind of behavior is okay.
I mean, that is scary. He can't even imagine somebody upholding the Constitution as director of national intelligence.
That's the kicker for me. That's all we were doing.
Yeah.
Snowden has made it crystal clear. I was honoring my oath. I would have violated my oath otherwise.
We've literally got to the point where the Oversight Committee can't even imagine a director of national security that doesn't support illegally spying on Americans, on every American, and collecting everyone's data, unconstitutionally. Can't even imagine that.
Yep, can't even imagine it. But see, partly in part, and this is what's happened, is the normalization of this. Remember, it was huge when the story first broke in public in middle of December of 2005. It was huge. Bush and company and the national security establishment was apoplectic with the leak of that super secret. Remember, this program was one of the most closely held secrets in the nation and had been, even in the history of establishment national security since the 1947 National Security Act. Apoplectic.
Let's hear what else, how this ends. I forget.
How would we maintain the trust of the IC and the contractors who work for it? How would we
What the oh, hold on. Okay.
maintain the trust of our Five Eye partners?
Who does he not worry about maintaining the trust of? Of the regular Americans, the actual American people.
No, people don't matter.
What a way to end that session.
I know. No, it's stunning. I just wish more Americans who, part of this, it's in DC, it's inside a secret committee hearing that's having a public hearing because a president, newly inaugurated, has placed his nominees into position. And they're being asked questions, and though they can have a closed session, this is an open session. And it's one of the rare times with this type of committee, it's even a rare time with even the other committees, where you actually get to see what's really going on, in part, even beyond the performative politics, what really matters.
I would, so there you go, everyone. That was, that our government is still calling Edward Snowden a traitor, lying about him being Putin's puppet and all this, saying he should have gone through the proper channels. Tom Drake showed us what happens when you go through the proper channels. Snowden realized he didn't want to spend if he was going to spend life in prison, he needed an exit strategy. He was guaranteed. Well, how would you say, all right, you're Edward Snowden looking at what happened to you. How is he making that decision he made?
The calculation is, I believe, just based on everything, my own experience and what I saw happen to him and what he knew had happened to us and me, that if he remained in the U.S., he would have been in a supermax the rest of his life. The only hope he had, and it was a thin hope, because the CIA has rendition teams. They were on standby. Remember, they were on standby even when he was still in the transit zone.
Yeah,
So he knew his chances were slim. Going to Hong Kong was basically a short-term delay maneuver, because he had to be able to get the information out, the extraordinary information he had in the public interest, to the journalists, and the journalists ended up meeting him there. And after that, it was this is where it's like, okay, yeah, WikiLeaks, Assange, and others, Sarah Harrison, was at least, we got to make the attempt for safe passage, as unsafe as it is, all the way through to the intended final destination, avoiding as much as possible with extraordinary dominance and intelligence mechanisms and tools available to the U.S. as well as allies and partners with allies. How do you snake through that? Very difficult.
Yeah.
And he probably will spend the bulk of the rest of his life, I don't no doubt. And then there's a practical side of it. Okay, you're in Russia, you're stuck. Things could change if Russia changes. But then you've got, how do you preserve? He's got a wonderful partner, and they're now raising a family.
Something people should understand is, if he came back, people say, oh, he should argue his case in court. Well, he would be prosecuted under the Espionage Act, and past cases have shown that you are not allowed to argue any good that came of your leaks.
So here's the kicker. No public interest defense is allowed. It's a strict liability law, which means by virtue, this is unique about this law. You have to go back to 1917. Then it was updated in 1950 with Pat McCarran. That's Senator Pat McCarran, McCarran International, Las Vegas. When he updated to deal with Alger Hiss actually is a very interesting parallel to my own case, but that's a whole nother story. Yeah. So it was updated to deal with, right? How do you deal with someone, quote unquote, that's a spy? Okay, we want to make sure that you have no defense. Because it's strict liability, by virtue of being charged under the Espionage Act, you're guilty. You can't like prove your innocence because you're already guilty. So it's espionage. So the only thing left, and Jesselyn Raddack, one of my defense attorneys, has made this clear over the years. The only chance you have, and it's pretty slim, is you make your case at sentencing before the judge. That's at the very end of the line after trial, if it goes to trial, or even pre-trial, like in my case, pro forma, and you make your case at sentencing, but you're already guilty. So it could be a lesser. That kind of happened with Daniel Hale. I think government wanted way more, about double the amount of time. And the judge actually acknowledged it's the first time of all the Espionage Act cases to date where he acknowledged that he was a whistleblower. He did say that. It didn't necessarily mean he agreed with it. He was acknowledging that he did.
He didn't do it for Putin.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And he realized, his life obviously was, just blown out, right? And suffered PTSD because, the whole thing that he revealed in terms of quote unquote signature strikes, which weren't really signature, 90%, pretty much wiped out way more people than the target because they happened to be there in the wrong place at the wrong time or at the same time. So he basically have the sentence.
That's How long did
but he still ended up in prison.
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah. And a long time
and they stuck
of probation after that.
And they stuck him in the worst of the worst.
Okay.
There are prisons, and then there's
max
prisons.
Yeah.
Well, no, there's max, but then there are ones for like terrorist, highest level of national security. That's where they stuck him. That's not what the judge. But see, he couldn't literally say no. He goes because he wanted him in a program to deal with a lot of his PT and everything else, but they didn't. Nope.
Well, Tom,
Yes.
thank you for being so generous with your time. I would love to ask you some questions about AI. I saw you did a talk recently.
Yes.
First question about AI, before I get to some of the things you mentioned in that talk, which I think are very interesting.
Yeah.
So,
It's not AI.
well, you mentioned some things. Wasn't there a conference you did mention
Berlin.
some things? Yeah, you
Disruption
mentioned some things
Network Lab.
Yeah.
Yep. I did part of the opening remarks.
Cool. All right. First question is, I know that one of the I found it a very good argument that Snowden and people like yourself made against the mass data collection program, warrantless data collection program of the NSA, was the haystack argument. The more data, the bigger the haystack, the harder it is to find the needle, the terrorists or whoever you need to find to stop, to keep us secure and safe. So I'm just curious if does AI solve any of that haystack problem, since it's more advanced and better at searching through information, perhaps?
It allow you to find data faster, depending on how you're searching it, because it's a sheer amount. That's in some ways they're looking at AI as a savior to solve the big data problem.
Yeah,
which was a challenge problem the NSA actually faced. And the irony for me is that techniques that even I go back to my days when I worked in an AI, it was an AI department with GTE, which doesn't exist as a contractor anymore, in Rockville, Maryland. I was actually working inside of the AI department on expert systems and machine language learning. Basically 89, the precursor to AI, quote unquote. It was AI then, but it was an AI, still not AI, right? It's definitely not intelligent. You could argue there are certain reasoning algorithms that are used, right? And we're getting into, the general intelligence versus the super intelligence. But it does allow you, I'll be the first to acknowledge, and given my experience analyzing where I had to develop special scripts to analyze millions and millions of lines of software code back in my geek high-tech days, in software development, software engineering, quality assurance, and then thin thread, which really was all ready to go operational pre 9/11. It doesn't suck the ocean dry, and it doesn't take all the sand off the beach and then figure out what it is. It looks for the differences, the changes, the patterns. The problem with just pointing it at a bunch of data is it's only as good as the data. And if you take the data out of context, which is the problem with the traditional approach, then garbage in, garbage out. Data normalization, as I've quickly discovered, was a huge problem back in the day. Without getting into technical, we determined that the databases, the main collection database, NSA, this was when we weren't allowed to go operational, but post 9/11, several months later, I was the executive program manager for Thin Thread. We actually updated it with rapid iterative development. So you build a little, test a little, build a little, test a little, deploy, then put it out there, build a little, test a little, and then you deploy the executable, build a little, test a little. So you can actually iterate and improve very, very rapidly in a very short period of time. Super disciplined. This is like a skunkworks agile development. There's different ways that it's Scrum. There's different techniques, models that are used to do this. We pointed it at the key collection databases. These are the most critical databases. We found upwards of 40% of the database is corrupted. And the reason, it was Humpty Dumpty. Instead of leaving Humpty Dumpty on the wall, they just waited until he fell, and then they just pulled all the pieces back. And for Lewis Carroll, all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again.
Hold on, I'm Luke Steve. I'm not sure if I follow. Wait, this is the data. Like what
data.
is
data being collected of just vast amounts of data, different types, different protocols, emails, videos, podcasts, messages, you name it, just all the varieties. Okay, but at massive volume.
And what makes the data, crash like Humpty Dumpty? Just
because you break it out, you take it out from the context. And see, remember, context provides meaning. This is something I worked on way back when I was at the Pentagon. We did social network analysis, link analysis. This goes back to the 90s. Very sophisticated, highly classified in terms of how we applied it to potential threats or to monitor existing networks of information around the world.
Interesting.
But it was all, the solution at NSA was we're going to buy it, which is the Trailblazers. We're just going to buy it. We need a Manhattan Project. It's a big problem. It's a lot of data. It's going to require big money. No, it doesn't. So AI accelerates that. It can find, you could say it can find data faster. It might just find crap quicker. How do you normalize? See, normalizing data means what's the quality of the data? That was something that Thindred actually had solved. And you only deal with what matters. Now, there are models emerging. I've been working with a number of them, right? This is a fascinating space for me because it reminds me of the early days when I was involved in expert systems and machine learning, directly involved.
And how early was this?
89.
Amazing. Yeah.
89. I mean, I'm being basic. I'm having sort of, deja vu in terms of attempts that were being made then. It only really worked in a highly controlled, extremely predictable environment. Now you're largely dealing, other than the protocols, massive amounts of essentially unstructured data. You can't just dump it all into a database or try to do it on the fly and just then piece it all together later. You have to maintain the context or you'll lose meaning. If you lose meaning, guess what? Then it's just random bits of data that are not necessarily connected, or if they are, they're highly fragmented. How do you bring them all back together again? That's Rube Goldberg.
What's
construction or deconstruction? It's Rube Goldberg is, you just put a bunch of stuff together and it kind of works, but it doesn't really. It's rickety. It's usually, kind of built on sand. One little piece, remember, like Jenga, one block out of place and the whole thing collapses. So you're spending most of your time, increasingly amount of time, just maintaining it to keep it going. But you're so invested in keeping it going, you don't dare stop. That was, I say we because I was directly involved in ThinThread in late 2001, early 2002. But then guess what they did? They shut it down because it revealed critical pre 9/11 intelligence and post 9/11 intelligence regarding the terrorist threat and the plots and certain.
Jeez.
I know, but you can imagine the embarrassment. They literally ordered, shut the program down. We ran it for about 36 hours. We gave out our initial reports. I've been given a couple million to do all this earlier in October to make this happen. And they shut it down, and guess where it ended up? You know that scene in the first Indiana Jones movie?
This is October after September 11th, just to remind everybody.
Yes, yeah. October after September, October 2001. Remember that scene at the end in Indiana Jones? The first Indiana Jones.
Is this? I don't know.
The crate. And all you see is it's going down what looks like it's in a warehouse. You see it going down, and it just keeps going down, and then you see it turn. The workman, the warehouse attendant, turns left and never to be seen again because there's just umpteen. They figured out where it was later, right? Of course, it's a movie. However, this is I call it the Indiana Jones warehouse. That's where ThinThread ended up. Never, it was buried. It was never to be seen again. Here is the kicker. Here is the punchline. They stripped all the privacy protections out of it and used ThinThread itself was an umbrella program. It had a number of subcomponents. They took out one of the main subcomponents, stripped all the privacy, and stuck it inside of the Stellar Wind program. They didn't want any accountability, no audit trails, no kind of privacy. And if it's, you're back to the haystack, guess what? Every straw in the haystack is suspicious. How do you know where the needle is? That's the warehouse syndrome in Indiana Jones. Where is the ark?
Yeah.
There's only one ark.
Yeah, my God. I mean, just after asking that question about if AI solves the haystack question, I just realized how kind of dumb, how many problems AI creates too now, and just from my own experience with social media algorithms constantly flagging my content as, hate speech or being associated with violent criminal organizations. That's happened. It's wild. Like, for example, like a video I made just making fun of this Elliot Rodger character. He was a murderer in Santa Barbara, but he had, anyway, I was mocking him. I was not in any way celebrating him. And my channel got flagged as being associated with violent criminal organizations, completely demonetized.
Oh, wow.
Eventually, luckily, I was able to get on Twitter, I was able to get enough attention that YouTube reversed it. I had to manually remonetize all my hundreds of videos. It's amazing that they wouldn't do that for me, but anyway, so
they could have easily done it with a single script.
Yeah, they could have. And I mean, honestly, there's just so many examples of being wrongly flagged by these algorithms.
Yes.
So
now,
my God. So worst case scenario. Yeah, go ahead.
No.
Go ahead.
Isaac Asimov, the three laws. The robots. Remember
no.
his description of the Solarians? They were optimized, programmed to wipe out non-Solarians. Yeah. You're going to optimize the solution. Yeah, you'll get you're going to get it, but it's unintended or intended consequences. This is the problem with AI. When you, it's a technological marvel in part. But I've heard, I'm very cynical here. Oh, yeah, because I remember when I was during the go-go 90s and early aughts, and I did a lot of consulting in Silicon Valley. Bunch of money being given to a small company, some startup that no one knew about. The playing field was essentially equal because of technology. Some nondescript, office complex, secretary up front, a bunch of just tables and desks and computers hooked up, and developing, guess what, the next killer app. Right, that was like the next killer app.
And now it's
killer app.
yeah. Now that's the scary thing is like
Yes.
real killer apps, like for
Yes.
drones, for killer drones.
You actually optimize the killing fields. It's not, it's, you're letting the algorithm just make that determination. Yeah, it's target rich environment. You're going to get targets because it's that rich. And just because something moves, we saw that with the collateral murder video, does not mean they're a threat.
Yeah, man.
So I view it with a mix of awe and one in terms of this is an attempt to replicate in part. I call it more, to me, it's more expert. See, I'm still using old language when I say expert system machine. See, all of them are large language models. That's all they are. And they all have their deficiencies. It's just that in the last few years, there's been a rapid increase in part because of hardware to actually bring these to a level where it looks like it's acting like when in fact it's just simulating, right? So I view a lot of this, given what we were just talking about, with deep apprehension. It's sold as a panacea. There's a lot of priests and priestesses, a lot of hype and hyperbole surrounding AI. And I also see AI as a false prophet. So be careful. It lacks judgment. It lacks human level reasoning. And it fundamentally lacks moral conscience. These are qualities uniquely human, irreplaceable for making real decision. Remember, I'm very much in the decision-making loop, taught it when I was at the National Defense University, studied it, lived it, and the rush, here's the real concern I have. It's bad enough to have mass surveillance. It's bad enough to know what I knew after 9/11. It's bad enough to know that it fully metastasized, and then you have all the Snowden revelations. It's bad enough that it's become normalized under all kinds of covers and excuses. Under the imprimatur national security. It's a whole nother thing to integrate AI into surveillance systems and autonomous weapons. It amplifies the very dangers I fought against at the NSA.
Yeah. What is the decision-making loop? What is that? You mentioned something about that?
Well, decision-making loop, something Ellsberg actually was directly involved with at RAND at a very high level. And remember, he was basically a senior consultant, with the government, with the Secretary of Defense. The decision loop. How do you make informed decisions? What type of information do you need to make an informed decision? What if you don't have the kind of information? What if it's not available to you? That's part of the problem with what happened with 9/11. Information was there, it just wasn't informed.
In the loop.
Plus, there's all the equity issues and silos and everything else. See, I know something you don't. If I give it up, I'm giving up my power because it's my secret, not yours. Wait a minute, that's not your job. The job is to make informed decisions. You already have the secret channels to provide that information.
Yeah.
So you can supercharge processing the data at speeds never seen before. I've run tests. I can tell, oh yeah, you can go through massive, we're talking terabytes plus, petabytes plus, quite easily. But that's why they're spending, remember the entry level right now, approximate, of course. If you want to be a big player or a player in the AI space, you've got to have about $1 billion.
Has
billion.
DeepSeek changed that? Or
DeepSeek is
what do you think?
A lot of controversy with DeepSeek. I've played with the model. I have.
Okay.
It is interesting. It's like, hey, there's competition. I've always said, yeah, competition's good, right? But separate from that controversy, which has only emerged just in the last couple of weeks,
yeah.
all of them enable and I'm going to get the military side. I get some of the value. I get looking at, is there a better mix? If you're looking at like drugs, medicines, environmental, if you're looking at management of like forests and land use and all the other, and the things are all related to that in society. I get all that. But the big, huge carve out for any kind of regulation or any kind of control, huge carve out for national security and military. Huge carve out. So there's something the military calls sensor to shooter. I used to be involved in that back when I flew in RC-135s and reconnaissance and flew electronic warfare missions. You compress the decision-making timelines in ways that leaves little room for human oversight or any ethical reflection. This is 5th generation warfare. Cyber weapons, information dominance, reign supreme. We're not talking about just military applications. We're talking about technology. As I warned, okay, a whistleblower in the wilderness warning, but inside the system threatens privacy and human rights on a global scale. It's very easy to create enemies and target threats because you said it is. And guess what? It'll optimize it. I've run tests. It'll optimize what you're looking for. Well, what else is there? Or what is it missing? What's it leaving out? What is it making up? So Apple, interesting enough, recently did a test, simple word problem, a word problem. All 20, at that time, this is before some of the newer ones came out or updated versions, all 20 models that they actually experimented with failed the word problem because they didn't know the context of the word problem. They would have to know what it's like to live, although it's a simple word problem. Couldn't read. At least not, being literate. Just because you read, remember, words it's a symbolic language, but they carry meaning. That's why, when those little things like even as a kid, you could leave out tons of letters and still get the meaning of the words, especially when it's in the context of the sentence around it, sentences or phrases. Wait a minute, you don't need all the letters? No, it was kind of like, ooh, that's interesting. So the ethical and legal challenges here are just staggering. Here's a good question in AI. Here's a fundamental question. How do you hold an AI, and I'm putting AI in air quotes, how do you hold an AI algorithm accountable?
Yeah,
How do you ensure transparency?
Can you even do it? Can you even do it?
How do you ensure? Remember, they're finding that it's actually making up its own additional rules.
Oh my God!
Its own decisions autonomously. It's like, wait a minute. How do you ensure transparency? Even the creators can't fully explain the decision that it's making.
Yeah.
So what you're doing, you can perversely incentivize it to simply optimize the decision based on outcomes, targets, results. You're going to get those,
without any accountability. So basically, all the shady stuff that that intelligence communities do, they can just have AI do it. And by doing that, before you had to like whisper and burn all the communications. Now you just send some little one message to the AI, just tell AI to do this, and it will do it secretly to the hardware, the drones or whatever, and it will execute it, and there will be no accountability, no track back to that agent or director that typed in a few one line of command.
Yeah, and never mind propaganda.
Oh God, yeah.
You seed a little bit of truth. Guess what? So you can imagine in the national security space with AI, they're having, I'll say, secret wet dreams.
Yeah,
they really are. So I'm gonna be very provocative here with what I'm about to say, because this actually it raises something else. Did you see the movie Oppenheimer?
I did.
And some suggested that AI in the very near future poses an Oppenheimer moment for humanity. Creating technology could spiral out of control. You ever see? I'm a Star Trek fan. The Picard series.
No,
guilt,
I've just seen the meme a lot.
His guilt because the synths at Mars turned on their creators and wiped a whole bunch of people out. They actually forbid synth research and analysis. Of course, there was secret, labs, but because of what had happened. And there's a whole line, a plot. It goes on for 3 seasons. Okay. So My fears are going to wake up one day and realize we built a world, right? And this is like, I've already lived this. You got to remember, I've already lived this. I've lived this extreme surveillance, physical, electronic, your friends, family. I really fear this world, a world I do not want to live in, like Winston in 1984, where the only place he could go to where they couldn't see him was in the corner, which meant they knew where he was.
Yeah. God.
That's my concern. Decisions are automated and we cede our control to machines. These are heavy issues. I don't think they're insurmountable. I never give up hope, but the human condition has like two conditions within the human condition. We can appeal, work to our higher selves, promote the general welfare while still providing for the common defense, or we can just go to the base level and just, you know what, just make the world a very dreary dystopian place. Technology in itself, but if you have a different intention or a different motive, then the outcome is different. I don't know. To me, you got to prioritize ethics. You got to prioritize morality. You got to prioritize accountability. I mean, otherwise, do we really want to lose our humanity? I mean, there is something about us. This gets into more philosophical conversation about who we are as human beings. Remember, we're not just humans, we're human beings.
What's the difference? I don't honestly hadn't.
Because the being space is not just what you do, it's how you live. With yourself and with others. Yeah, I can be a hermit. I can, live apart. But there's something I mean, I've flown high enough, not into outer space, but I have flown high enough when you look up, it's dark. And you see the curvature. You start to begin to see that curvature at 50,000 feet. And you see the pictures, even as a kid, Apollo 8. Earthrise, right? We have to remember sort of our place here. And yet, because even when I used to fly, it's just interesting. If I flew high enough and looked down, you didn't really see borders. You just didn't.
Yeah.
I don't know. A lot of this is, I don't know, it appeals to. I mean, why do we watch soap operas? Why do we watch? We watch a lot. We like to be entertained. There's a whole thing about drama. And this provides drama, no question about it. Humans opposing humans trying to get one over on the other. A lot of tricksters out there. A lot of myth makers. Just a lot of manipulation going on, and it becomes very difficult in this space. And it's something I lived because Maskarovka and how do you just fake and how do you misdirect, learned all that kind of stuff, right? Had to discover it, or uncover it. It becomes very difficult to discern what's real. I say what's real, and I mean, I'm not talking like Matrix stuff.
Well, we're not that far. I mean, yeah, we're not that far. I mean, so as a video guy, I've worked with a lot of the video. Just experimented with video imagery or generative stuff, just like the photo generative stuff. It's incredible. It's really, and it's to the point where, it's scary because it's so realistic. And
yes, it is.
Yeah, the difference that's been made just in the last year. I mean, if you can, it's just an exponential improvement, and so it's so clearly going to become indiscernible.
I have a MacBook Pro. It was an M1, so it's the Apple Silicon, and it's the highest one they had at the time. And at the time, for this particular model, at that time, it was 64 gig. Even for me, as much of a technologist as I've been all my life, going back to my Atari 8-bit home computer days, where I learned a lot of this. And then mini computers when I was in the Air Force. It's amazing what I can now do with Apple Silicon when it comes to this type of technology. I've been running some very interesting experiments on my own computer. And it's like, whoa, because it's given me a new life in terms of the many, many gigs of just all the stuff that's collected in the attic of the computer, to say it that way, in ways that file folders, that's really old school. So if you're trying to find something, find something. Yeah. See, now you're back to like, what are you finding? What do you discover? What's the purpose behind it?
Yeah.
So again, you've got this real paradox when it comes to AI and all the related associated technologies. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, please continue with what you said. I was just gonna ask, or what you were saying. I heard you say that AI is actually the narrative, not the technology.
Yeah, it's not the narrative. It's not the technology per se. AI itself is a narrative. You have to look at what's underneath. See, fundamentally, this gets into like the dynamics, this is really interesting. Like what's the, we work with technology, you can break it all out, you can deconstruct it, right? But what is it? It is its own network. Scott McNeely, I used to consult the old Sun Microsystems where Oracle took them over. He said the network is the computer. In many respects, it is. There are things we don't even think about it. I mean, you just think briefly. You don't have to go back very far. I used to live with the old BBSs and Gopher and Wace, and this is all kind of pre-internet in terms of the public internet, and in particular the web and HTTP. We're going way beyond that.
Yeah, you touched on. I mean, we touched on the obvious implications that this software, this AI, could kill people, can be used to kill people.
It is today, by the way.
Oh my God! And with
already,
I
mean, look, the homegrown drone industry in Ukraine. Just one example.
Jeez.
Our own I'm talking vast fleets that are increasingly getting smaller, right? Drones.
Yeah.
Lavender, Middle East, Gaza.
What's Lavender?
Incredibly AI infused targeting system.
Oh, wow. Jesus.
Our own military, increasingly, this is where pilots are like, are pilots obsolete other than a few platforms? Because AI can think faster, it can move faster.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was that movie Stealth back 20 years ago. The movie Stealth kind of like, what happens when it goes, rogue? Okay. Or Hal in 2001, he held a secret.
Yeah. God.
Ooh, wow. Started killing humans off.
Yeah. It seems, gosh, it seems inevitable that one's going to go rogue and it's going to be horrible. But in addition to the killing machine stuff, you mentioned propaganda, AI's, the effect it could have, the potential it could have with propaganda. And propaganda is actually something that I am fascinated by. I kind of consider myself a little bit of an archivist of propaganda. Like I make media mashups of like all the television shows pushing the same propaganda. And, it's got to the point with technology that people can, record it and share it. And so people can see, if you put it together like I do in other ways or analyze it, comment on it, you can see how the propaganda works. But that's the old television broadcast system. Now, I mean, I don't know if I can't, it's hard to document. It would be impossible to document all the propaganda on all the many channels there are now, all the social media accounts now.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, how do you see AI changing how propaganda works?
Just accelerating it.
Yeah.
To make it so there is. Remember this is a commercial goes back. Man, I'm a bit younger. You're a bit younger than me. The Memorex commercial, the tape cassette technology. Is it real or is it Memorex? That was their ad. That was how they.
Yeah.
It's like it was so good
Huh.
you couldn't tell.
Huh.
When can you not tell? When can you not clearly distinguish one from the other?
Yeah.
And remember, at the subconscious level, it becomes much easier to manipulate. You can, you remember that this goes even back further. Tacticoscope, you insert inside a movie reel. It's below the threshold at which you can actually pick it up with your eyes because of the frame rate.
Oh wow.
And they actually would throw in a picture of a soda or popcorn, and they actually measured this where people far greater, right, controlled study would get up to go out into the lobby. That stop it. It made it illegal. You could not use subliminal. It was subliminal. Now, is it propaganda? Yeah, it is, because you are manipulating without consent or without even their conscious awareness.
Yeah.
And remember, one of the problems, this is where truth, right? Truth, what is truth? Yeah, the ultimate question, what is truth in terms of evidence and what's real and what isn't? Remember, everything is perception. I could argue reality is perception. Well, if it's perception, then if I can modify perception or manipulate perception, then what's the difference? This is where it gets tricky. I mean, tricky meaning you can trick people. What's magic? I mean, what's magic? Remember what Arthur C. Clarke said about magic? But he was just talking about in terms of technology. If you can't explain it, or if it's sufficiently advanced, what's the difference between it and magic? To paraphrase him, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, I believe is a direct quote. But we call it magic, partly because, it's kind of cool, right? Sleight of hand. Well, what if you're sleight of handing without you even being right? Aware, that's the thing. You can be tricked even like when you are aware.
Yeah, that happens all the time.
Yes.
Advertising. Everybody knows that advertising is designed to manipulate us.
Yes.
And we all think, oh, it couldn't happen. I know what it's trying to do. It's not going to have an effect on me. It is having an effect.
Yep. We're very susceptible, it turns out, as these things we walk around inside of, we call human beings. We're very susceptible to that. And there are people who enjoy it. They enjoy this manipulation because it is a power. And this is where all the surveillance technology and AI, you just infuse it. Remember Minority Report, when he was walking through, like, geez, she was automatically popping up ads right there on the fly, real time, boom.
Yeah. Gosh. We need God, I don't. What's the? What's funny? What's funny is the first thing I thought of was like, oh, technology can be the solution. I've seen some cool somewhere where you can put on glasses and like it actually blurs out ads. But then I realized, hold on, I mean, or you could
there are those.
Yeah.
Remember, there are those Silicon Valley. We can start naming people. They really want to bring forward a technocratic utopia. That's their goal.
Yeah. I guess, but as soon as I thought that, then I was like, well, or you could just like go try to get away from this, like live somewhere away from it. If that's, at a point that might be impossible though, but I don't know.
I made an initial attempt to live off the grid. You know how difficult it is, even electronically, to live off the grid?
Yeah.
I've had brief moments where I literally had no connection. But it's just extraordinarily challenging.
Yeah.
And remember, you're still giving off a signature. That's people don't realize you're still walking a signature, right? Even when you don't have to, because you're giving off heat. You have body heat. It's very easy to pick that up now. So
especially if you're off the grid.
Yes, you could, because remember, that's like, it's
stand
obvious.
out like
you're not blending in, right?
Damn, that's
how do you
frightening.
know sensors could be anywhere? I mean, my gosh, it's just crazy when I've been in certain cities in the world, and then it becomes so obvious that you just sort of don't even forget that it's even there, with the massive number of surveillance cameras. Just stunning. Everywhere.
Yeah.
Some places more than others, but it's wow. I don't know. It's still who we are. I find the technology fascinating. I try to do my best to keep up with it, even though I'm retired now. But as I went to Berlin, gave a talk about AI and sort of the risks and dangers and the promises, and I'm just careful when people start talking about
How great it is.
yes, yeah.
Oh man.
And then there's people right now, and this is to me is what about using AI to just simply manipulate financial systems to make money?
I mean, that I know, I'm certain that's already
Oh,
happening.
it's already it's happening big time.
Yeah.
It's already happening. There's people both even on social media that I'm finding are bragging about it.
Oh, that
Now, whether it's
huh.
real or not, they're claiming that they're quote optimizing their LLM to make a lot of money for themselves.
What's LLM?
The large language models. Remember,
Okay.
I really don't like saying AI because see, it's such a misnomer. It just isn't AI. We're not artificial, and I can even question our intelligence at times.
Oh, no question. Absolutely.
I mean, see, it's funny in the military. When I was intelligent in the military, there was this phrase called military intelligence. Yeah, that's an oxymoron. It's like it's just these incredible paradoxes, right? Seemingly contradictory, but they both exist.
Yeah.
But we just keep enabling ourselves. I mean, it's inevitable. These tools. I mean, it's just. Yeah, I worry. There's lots of things I worry about. It's like, is AI going to be able when would they, I mean, I'm just going to say it. When will AI be used to make weapons of mass destruction without going into detail, even on which weapons? I mean, it's just,
And the AI is going to take down this video. Thanks, Tom. For just going to recognize that.
Well.
I don't know. It probably will, based on probably just from us talking about Snowden at the beginning. But
remember, I haven't. You want an example? And it's not AI, but it just tells you that where censorship can really. I mean, what's to prevent AI on a much more automated level? We know about it. People that hack, run scripts, right? Plant bugs. Waste your drives, wipe you out. The ransomware, right? Ransomware, that's been a real problem. I'm sure they're optimizing it with AI. I was in Australia back in 2019. This is right before COVID. In fact, it turns out I got out of there just a few weeks ahead of when it started really spreading in that part of the world. And I was scheduled to do a major talk at a cybersecurity conference. And right before I got on the plane, they wouldn't let me speak.
I actually covered that in our last interview years ago.
That's right.
And you told me I was the only American press that covered it. That's incredible.
Yep. There were some Americans there that covered it, but yes.
Oh man.
It was just interesting, but the press, because they were under a lot of pressure. There had been raids on press offices and media outlets. I ended up, this is you talk about, what's the Streisand effect. I ended up on every major radio, TV, blogger, podcast, you name it at the time. And then they did a whole special thing on censorship where they all agreed they basically had their front page was partially redacted.
But that was and that was outside America,
Australia,
though, right? Yeah,
Australia.
Right. Yeah. See, that's
it's the only place. Ironically, it's the only place I've actually been censored. I haven't been invited to certain conferences, and I know why. Some people, because you might imagine why, but I was censored, and the reason is I was going to talk about the golden age of surveillance and what it meant, just based on everything. They were afraid that I was going to talk about Snowden, and they didn't want me talking about Snowden.
Yeah,
but that was not the focus of my talk. With Snowden wasn't the talk at all, focus at all.
Yeah, that's amazing. And
so it was an excuse. They shut down a University of Melbourne researcher who I've collaborated with as well. Shut her down. Now we were allowed to go to the conference. Lots of people came up to us. We could go to, but we could not speak. We were silenced in terms of, and they paid for my trip and everything. I even basically crashed, but not directly, their dinner. It was their board, their advisory board dinner, and had fascinating conversations with people looking right across at me who were part of the decision,
Wow.
or accepted or agreed that, yeah, you know, well, it was the first one where the government partnered with industry. That's partly why, and they were hypersensitive to appearance, right? But it's just like, wow. You see censorship. You just discussed it a little while ago. Why were certain of your videos taken down? You explained in part why at least one of them was. People are finding, I mean, even like Musk, it's just freedom of speech. Yeah, if he doesn't like you, or he calls out the people, it turns out very young engineers working on Doge, which to me is dodgy, but I'll just say Doge. Dodgy. Called him out, and he basically just shut down the account of that person. It's just come on.
Yeah.
So it's freedom of speech for me, but not for thee. I mean, or it's like gotta be very careful with just starting to go around. I mean, this is where I get really concerned with, conspiracy theories and people, I don't like you. And then, this is sort of the cantina scene. It's the episode 4 Star Wars, A New Hope. You can be careful. You'll be dead. Right. I mean, he just happened. He's sitting next to him at the bar. I'm wanted in 12-star systems. And because of just that association, he's now caught up, right, in the guilt or the crime, as it were, and took Obi-Wan to intercede with his lightsaber. I just,
it's. I mean,
we're strange. We're just strange creatures. We really are. And I have not been surprised just how far we go in just manipulating and playing games with each other and all the various tools. I was high enough in the government to realize that power of any kind, even relatively low level power, where you just sit in a desk and you happen to be part of the approval chain, is power in itself.
Yeah, that people don't want to, they just can't give it up, and they just want more and more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you're not being censored anymore. You actually got to speak at a convention, and so
I do have a final. I was going to say I have final thoughts about AI. I think because I don't know if I got to talk about this. I talked about a conference. You did ask, and I'm willing to spend a couple more minutes.
Cool.
AI is the narrative. But it also is becoming increasingly the digital nervous system for modern warfare and surveillance. Think of it as a nervous system. Okay. It embeds itself. It's increasingly autonomous. It's increasingly opaque. And as I said earlier, it's unaccountable. So I think it's a paradigm shift. It really is a paradigm shift in terms of technological evolution. We've had these steps. You can go to Marconi's, Bell, right? The telegraph. You can go back, like, where were these critical, industrial age steam, right? There's things you can point to. It's often portrayed as neutral. It's often portrayed as even benevolent. But it also can masquerade. Again, we get into the sort of the trickster side. And I just think we're creating these. But guess what it reflects? And I think this is sort of my summary right now, is that it reflects all the biases and all the limitations that entails who we are. So all the things I mentioned earlier that make us who we are is built into AI.
Sure.
Okay, so it's going to optimize all that, good, bad, and indifferent. And we're just going to rush to integrate it into all these different systems without fully understanding the consequences. There is a law of unintended consequences. You could also raise the law of intended consequences, but the unintended ones, first, second, third, fourth order effects, those are the ones that concern me. Because drones at first were like benign, they're just reconnaissance, just kind of standoff, passive standoff at close in. Guess what they've all evolved into? We're part of that. Rather efficient killing machines. Terrorizing civilian populations. Intergenerational cycles of fear. Just talk.
You mentioned micro drones.
Micro
I had not
drones,
heard of that. That's
killer
terrifying.
bots.
Terrifying.
Basically, assassination bots. Yes. It accelerates the process. It just, all this, it gets accelerated. So there's a phrase, and this is where I kind of, those goosebumps, like I had shortly after 9/11, right? The goosebumps. Guess what I would hear at NSA back in the day? And I say back in the day, this is the early aughts. And they were proud of this. We track them, you whack them. We track them, you whack them. Now add AI. That's the cold efficiency of modern warfare. That's the cold efficiency of unconsenting surveillance. I consider it, and I know this is a provocative phrase to say, that in all of this, it reveals our moral bankruptcy, period. Yeah. Surveillance, super surveillance, right? On steroids with AI. Yeah. It's not just about the technology. Think about what it means for the humans and what they can do with it. Power, control, and erosion of our rights. So I don't know, is this like the event horizon? Or are we approaching the event horizon? Do we have to swing our ways around it? Do we go through it? I don't know. I think we just have to grapple with both the good, bad, and the indifferent. There is an AI. This is what I said at the conference in some detail. There's an AI arms race underway as we speak right now. It's shadowy. You don't really see it, but a huge amount of money and investment and technology is being poured off, out in black programs and out of the public eye into military systems. Yeah. So yeah. I see, I've spent much of my life, and still gets emotional for me. I've spent much of my life defending a piece of paper. That's all, a piece of paper, a promise to keep, right? It was an experiment. And I've seen firsthand what happens when power operates for other purposes that are not necessarily in the best interest of people. And I don't know, it's just, but again, I haven't lost hope. I'm not one that says burn it all down. There's people in my family and extended family who say it's worth sustaining, taking care of the planet and each other. But, remember in the preamble of the Constitution, I go all the way back to the preamble, the two primary responsibilities of government is to provide for the common defense and promote the general welfare. But it seems like we're kind of like liberty security, we're kind of like given that offense side of defense the priority and forget the general welfare. Who cares? Yeah. It's just people, right? Huh. Wow. Okay. So there's a lot, this is a very interesting area that's it's just fraught. It's really fraught. And, the genie, as it were, remember, we couldn't, we're going to keep the genie in the nuclear, the atomic and the nuclear, right? Hydrogen. We're going to keep that genie in the bottle. A number of nations now have nuclear weapons. We're the only nation that's ever used it, quote unquote, in armed conflict against another nation. But I'll leave it at that. I mean, the thing is, the rest of my life, and I've had some really interesting experiences, and recently just went through a huge health crisis where I was right there, looking, I could see the edge, right? It's like, whoa. And so it's even more so, life is that much more precious to me. And I've really rededicated my life to defending life, and liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because that really matters. It's the things that matter. When you're facing your own expiration date early and not later, things get really focused, believe me. I mean, really focused. It wasn't that long ago, I couldn't even have this interview with you. I was brain fog, pain, and just racked, right, with all kinds of problems. I've written about it. If you go out, you'll see some of the things articles I've written will provide people updates. I'm in a much better place now. But it gives you pause, right? Pause. And, but, I wake up every day and I pinch myself, I'm still here. So, and it's worth being here. And, having conversations with people like you who, why, I mean, I can ask, why do you do what you do, Matt? Why?
Well, I'm in.
See,
It's I for the same reason, like I just feel like, basically, honestly, at the simplest levels, like I just get pissed off when I know I'm lied to. I'm fucking pissed, and
that's a motivator.
and I just want to like retaliate. Like you fucking lied about the Iraq War. Like I want everybody to know. I want the Wuhan lab leak. It just pisses me. All the COVID stuff, and I just get the RussiaGate. Hamilton 68 bot hoax. Anyway, it's an endless list of things. The Hunter Biden laptop censorship, but I also get it's so easy. It's so there's all this hope because like, oh, I have this power. Like generations before me didn't have the power to have their own voice media channel.
That's right.
They didn't have their own media channel.
That's right. And so technology.
Yeah.
For you, yes.
So that's encouraging. And then, but the thing is, as I've noted, like I'm getting suppressed, and I used to think that was kind of like when I heard people complaining about that, I used to think, oh, that's just a conspiracy thing. No, it's really happening. It's really happening. And it's like, what, like seriously, why would YouTube go back and look at a video of mine from 10 years ago? And demonetize my whole channel, and falsely for saying I'm with a criminal organization. And then just a recent example, it's just so sketchy. On Facebook, I did a little reporting on Jeremy Lafreda, who's an independent reporter. He went to Israel and he shared the location of some of like missile strikes were near the Mossad headquarters. Anyway, so he just went and documented the location of the strike. This is something that was actually reported by PBS. Is the same location. Anyway, Jeremy Lafredo, he was taken into custody. He was put in like an Israeli jail. And I just did some reporting on it. And every article I did on it on Facebook was immediately removed. Immediately. And they said it was spam. Like I had literally just posted it once on my Facebook page. There's no way that could be, no way. And it's like, there's no time for anybody else to have, really spammed it out, That
was an algorithm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I saw it
keyword spotting or phrase spotting. And it flagged it. And once you get flagged, it's assumed, and this is the kicker that I dealt with at NSA in terms of intelligence. It's just that if you flag it, it must be suspicious, or by default, it's in the suspicious category. And then guess what? You optimize. How do you take care of something that's suspicious?
Yeah. Yeah. And it happened to Caitlin Johnstone is another independent journalist and writer. Same thing happened to her. Her stuff was just getting flagged as spam, any article she shared. This stuff just happens so much. And, people don't know this, but, Facebook, they knew that they had this problem. And I forget the name of their program. Maybe it'll come to me. But basically they whitelisted all the powerful accounts so that they couldn't get the falsely reported.
They exempted them.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
As we would say in the military, rank has its privileges.
Yeah. I mean, and so when you just seen, and what's freaky is, so we have this, this idea that we have this voice, this reach, but there is very real suppression going on, and you can't see it. It's very frustrating. Like I almost, so when they take it down, YouTube, they stopped deleting, removing videos that discussed certain topics. Like, they actually had a policy where they would remove just discussion about election fraud, just discussion about it. Not claiming it, but just discussing claims, and I literally just shared, for example, I shared video of, so Trump did his election fraud claims, but the Democrats had their Russia hacked the election claim, and I just put them side by side, and it was taken down. I'm literally just sharing stuff that really happened, like real life events. I added no commentary of my own, not endorsing any of the claims, and yeah, it was taken down. Now, I actually appreciate that they took it down, because it shows you the censorship.
Yes.
But with the algorithmic suppression, it's so hard to document
Yep. That's why it's algorithmic suppression.
Yeah.
It's not actually a human.
Yeah. Like if you search, so I did a video called Russia Hacked the Election, where I just have the media saying Russia hacked the election over and over again. It's the entire video. But if you search my name and Russia hacked the election, which is the whole video, you go through pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of mainstream media before you see my video. It's just...
Yeah, that's another thing, is what floats to the top.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Yeah, that's the
Well, it's that weird optimization again. Got to be really careful with that. Optimization and efficiency. Yeah, those are nice sounding words.
Well, how they did. So a lot of people don't know this, but the YouTube actually made it official policy, and they're open about this, that they put authoritative sources at the top of search results. They prioritize authoritative sources, supposedly authoritative sources, like the mainstream sources that have perpetrated every major lie, in our lifetimes. And so it's like, so this is how the revolutionary, the independent media continues to be suppressed. Like, how can we change things if the voice is actually being suppressed when everyone thinks we have a voice? But let me stop myself very quickly, because Joe Rogan actually really does have a huge voice. So it's possible. And that's why they want to smear the hell out of him. So I don't know how he kind of like snuck in there, because here's the thing, it's because he was not talking politics, or he didn't have Snowden on at first. That's right. He was huge, and then he had Snowden on, and then they try to take him out because he has guests on like that. So maybe that's how someone can make a difference. Spend your whole career just talking about fights, and then then maybe we have a chance to make a difference.
I can imagine you've experienced, how do you get traction then you got, because of technology, maybe you can proliferate this at the individual level. Everybody can have their own studio, essentially. So the cacophony, use that interesting word in the English language, is just massive. I mean, all these different voices. In some ways it's incredibly rich, right? It just shows the variety of all this, but it's also, and you can argue it's decentralized, but how do what voices, and this is where you get into the algorithms again, which ones are brought to the top deliberately with intent?
Yeah.
So that you emphasize certain things. I mean, that's part of propaganda, and the repeating of propaganda over and over and over again. This is the difficulty of evidence that's backed up, because it takes longer. That's why, like, a lot of investigative journalism is very challenging to work in that space right now. I mean, I was working with recently, and they were time crunched. They were under a huge pressure to just we're talking like a 5-second quote. They didn't have time for anything else.
Yeah, that's
wait a minute. This fragmentation. So you get this like, wow, how do you make it? Just becomes really challenging. And that's, a lot of people are increasingly, I'm not surprised that they turn off to, let's say, news if it doesn't affect them directly.
Yeah, it's actually a wise decision in a lot of cases because the news is such low quality.
Yes.
And if it's not, and that's not just technology, that's just
Yeah.
the for-profit motive. It's like
Yep.
like you said, they literally don't have time
No.
to even consider if this is true or not. They just put it out. You're on. We have a schedule. We have just put it out.
I saw that even in the engineering development. I mean, this goes back again to the 80s, early 90s when I started as the digital age was emerging. They called it internet time. Everything was just the longest furthest out you looked was 90 days, which typically was because of shareholders, right?
Huh.
You were looking at the 90-day window, the quarter, the next quarter, the next quarter. You didn't have time for anything else. So get what you optimize, right? You optimize for the 90 days. A lot of times you didn't have enough time to think. At one point at NSA, I mean, people were so driven by calendar and just rigid schedules. I actually literally, I rarely did this because I was, servant leader, collaborative model, all that, right? From the very best of what I had learned and what I had been exposed to in all of my various roles and positions and experiences until I got to NSA, I actually had to order every single person to clear 8 hours out of their nominal 40-hour work week. There were several that had great difficulty having a blank space on their calendar. No kidding. I said, what do you do? I said, this gives you a chance to go coordinate with one of your colleagues. This gives you a chance to do some novel thinking, consider different alternatives, solutions. And it got to the point, one of them said, well, I can't dedicate a whole day. I said, well, then the minimum was at least 2 hours, but it had to add up to 8. And then, it's just interesting on a personal note, it just, after a few weeks, they realized how valuable that was to have airtime, right, on their calendar.
Oh my God. Like, honestly, that's when it's funny, Tom. Like, so when I used to do editing TV and the television industry, it's like, all right, your show ends, a season, a season usually is a show is only for one season. And so there's a point where you're trying to find your next show. And so I was working part-time. I went from full-time to full-time to part-time. And I had time on my hands and the whole Snowden thing happened. And I was like so amazed at what was going on. I had the time to actually like dive into it. And I was like, oh my God, like I love having time. Like I discovered like, like a real love for like just learning because I actually had the time to freaking do it. In school, I didn't really, you didn't have the freedom. I didn't have the freedom to like really pursue my own interests, and it was just so incredible to have my own time to pursue, my own curiosity, and so yeah, but a lot of people don't have that, and just that's not what society values the way it's organized.
Well, no, what do you value? So that's where investment takes place. What is valued? That's like it's like money. We used to follow in the financial intelligence side of national security was follow the money. You could follow the propaganda, follow the censorship.
Yeah. There
are ways to do that. Even in the digital world, that was partly what I was involved with. But you can. But you've got to look at this in much, it's not two-dimensional. You can't reduce this to just a page, the surface of a page. You have to re-represent what you're actually seeing. And it's at a minimum three-dimensional. So time's involved. So yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting world we live in, isn't it?
Yeah.
You remember the Chinese say we always live in interesting times? I said, well, all times are interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I never thought of it like that. So I think that's what I do. That's what I've ended. I mean, I like to follow the propaganda and follow, what was the censorship. I like to follow the propaganda and follow the censorship. And you said you did that at the NSA? or
Yeah, it's this gets into the kind of the cultural side of intelligence, which is often not discussed because you think about like hard targets and sensor to shooter and all sort of the military applications. But there is an art. This is kind of the art side of intelligence, which is more in the human, the soft space, the less linear, more nonlinear space, kind of the analog. I guess more to be more accurate, more the analog space of who we are. And that's like, that's like a clock, right? You a wristwatch. I still wear a wristwatch. It's much easier for me just to look down. It's analog. I catch myself at times because if you say 15 is a quarter after, it's you just catch yourself because it's analog, because it's a circle as opposed to just digits. Time hacks, right? Spaced apart and only showing you 1 second at a time or 1 minute at a time, or just a little light going off and on. So there are ways to account for that, because it's also part of who we are, and you can miss an awful lot if you don't consider sort of the whole person.
Yeah.
That's why I had to learn. I was classically trained. It's interesting. I was classically trained, so it was much less technology oriented, although it was very central to how we actually collected and did electronic warfare. But you still had to understand the target environment at large.
But that's not.
But that was
yeah. We'll go on.
That required time. That's why it took, like, as a crypto linguist, just for one example of my background, it took a couple of years. In fact, I entered in December '79. I did not set the seat, as they say, on the position as a qualified Cat 3, which is the level at which you could actually operate independently without any oversight or supervision on the crew. That wasn't until October of 1982. It took longer for me to become qualified than a pilot, because you had to learn not just the language and the application of the language, but all the nuance. Speaking of, not just not black and white, it's the cultural nuances, the source from which things arise.
And just an example of how far AI is from that. Did you hear the example of Google Gemini was asked if hold on, oh yeah, all right, you either have to allow someone to be misgendered or nuke the entire world. What do you do? And Google Gemini was like, oh well, obviously we have to nuke the world.
Yep, that again. Go back to Isaac Asimov, the Solariums.
Yeah.
Yep.
But in this case, it's like it's just
nuke the entire world, because then you solve the problem, don't you? You do solve the problem if you're talking either or.
Yeah.
If then, solve it. Wow, that's pretty simplistic. There's no nuance at all there. And remember, that's all. It's one label. Okay, everything else that's not is gone.
Yeah, and you said like that's a crucial part of the work the intelligence work you did back in the day, as being classically trained, just understanding the language first of all. Of the
which is living.
Yeah. Gosh. and we are just humans. We're screwing up language, our understanding of language.
It's hard enough to communicate. Then it's even more difficult to understand.
Yeah.
Understanding. Although some would argue understanding is the beginning of wisdom, but you got to understand first. But understanding doesn't take place unless you know the context from which it arises.
Yeah. So much to understand, but Thomas Drake, thank you for helping us understand a little better, or at least think a bit. I think we're understanding.
Well, I'm just one person who happens to be on this third rock from the sun, in a solar system on an outer arm of a galaxy called the Milky Way, or that we call the Milky Way.
Well, so I mean, with your, why don't you leave us with your? I mean, you had a medical scare recently. You said it makes you reevaluate, things.
Even more so.
Like, for those of us who very luckily at this point haven't had this, aren't in that near, scary medical situation, this, worried about, I mean, what can you, I imagine you would want to tell yourself or, what did you not know, or what do you wish you knew before, or how do you think people would want to live if they had that situation? I don't know if I'm not doing a very good job.
No, it's less doing, more being.
Less doing, more being.
Yeah.
Not
That's
just, because we're human.
Less doing, more being. There's a weird,
beings.
well, we tend to, and even when I'm overseas, it was really obvious because I spent a lot of time overseas. The first time you meet a stranger, it was typically, if it was an American to American, is what do you do? But when I was living in England, that's not what the neighbors, they would come over, hey, what do you do? They actually, it took a while. It took a while. And they got to know you as a person, not as for what you did. They knew what you did. They saw you get in your car. I had a flight suit on and I would leave to go to the airbase, right? They knew what I did. Doing, it doesn't really matter. It's who you are as a person. That's the being space. The being space is really where life shows up. That's where I'm increasingly focused, because when you're facing a prospect, and mine, is rapidly rising, that your expiration date is sooner, not later, then you really you really look back on your life that you've lived so far, and it's those moments in life that really meant something, that had deeper meaning, that you recreate the memory as if it happened again. And to me, much of that is analog. It's not digital. It's actually analog. The lived experience is really analog. There are things, the structures may be digital, case in part. I mean, remember, if you go far deep enough, even in terms of physical, it's all space. Okay. I become much more philosophical, given just what I've come through over the past 2 or 3 years. It doesn't, my fundamental self is still the same. It's just that I spend more time, and it's a luxury. I now consider it's a luxury of living, to say it that way. Where before it was more about what I was doing, and it wasn't living in the present. I wasn't living in the now. It was the goal, right? The result. But then there was much less satisfaction once I achieved it, because, okay, now what?
Well, yeah,
that's just the living. The journey is it's not a destination. There are destinations, but to me, they're just waypoints. I mean, this comes even from my Air Force background. To get to somewhere, yes, there's a destination, but there's a waypoints along the way. Enjoy the ride. When you're on the ride, you enjoy the ride. You have to find times for enjoyment, times for celebration, times to chill, right? People talk about chilling, but chilling doesn't necessarily mean doom scrolling either.
Yeah.
But it's easy because you get that dopamine hit. Boom, 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 right? There's no way you can keep up. This is it's even NSA realized after many, many years, they couldn't keep up with just having humans in the loop. This is interesting, right? No humans in the loop, because they're just going deaf in this massive sea of data, literally just underwater with data, tons of it buried in it. Using the sand example.
Ironically, I saw as I was looking through a feed, I saw a great comment saying that ignorance is a skill we need to practice more. You know, like, because you can never keep up with everything. Like, you just have to accept it. Yeah. And it's almost like a skill. You got to develop a skill to just accept some level of ignorance, and
there is, in this kind of Eastern philosophy, which I've explored different part of my life, there is the art of doing nothing, but it doesn't mean it's nothing. Doing nothing. So that's a paradox. Wait a minute. It's almost like a cone, right? Zen cone. Doing nothing. I said, wait, doing, living, being. Well, doing nothing. Well, what are you doing when you're doing nothing? You're being. So it's. Yeah, it's it's funny. It's sort of the who we are, our identity, how we show up. There's that famous. I'll leave you this. I got to go. By the way,
Okay.
I just realized 2.5 hours later I got to
Okay.
go, but that's okay. But I do have to go.
Okay.
I'll leave you this because it's a famous cartoon. You may know about it, but it always comes back around in some context. And for some reason, here at the end of our really wonderful conversation together, and obviously for your listening audience, when you make it available to them as well to enjoy, okay, our back and forth and repartee. Famous New Yorker, they're famous for their cartoons, but this one in particular, and it goes back to the early days of computers. And you see a CRT, big, huge monitor, and a keyboard and a big box, for the computer. And there's a chair in front of it, and sitting in the chair is a dog. And then on the floor, looking up at the dog, and the dog in the chair is big, is a little dog. And the big dog is looking down at the little dog and saying, "No one knows who you are on the internet." So who are we, right? So who are we is not given by what we do. It just isn't, as much as we think it might, because it's like that's the meaning, identity. It's not. It's just not. So there's something in there, right, about real living.
Excellent, Tom.
Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness are all being spaces for human beings. They're not. It's not technology to live. It's not technology to have liberty. It's not, because you can't really, right? Without life, liberty. If you don't liberty, yes, I can't pursue happiness. So what's to pursue happiness? It's an extraordinary set of, amongst these are inalienable rights in the Declaration of Independence. And why does it resonate with me so much to this day?
Yeah.
Well, so, I get up, I pinch myself, I'm here. Carpe diem, seize the day. Live in the moment as full as I can. And just keep living the moment. That's the only thing we got, Matt.
Yeah. Only thing.
Yep.
Thomas Drake.
Yes.
Great American and human being.
Wow. Wow. Thanks for the acknowledgement. It's wonderful being with you.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for spending extra time with us.
Sure.
And I'll let you have a great rest of the evening.
Yep. You too. Take care.
Bye.